Welcome to the Finance Flow channel. Today we're tackling a critically important topic, the armed conflict between India and Pakistan, which this spring of 2025 has once again pushed the world to the edge of a global crisis. In this video, we'll break down the historical roots of the decades-long Kashmir standoff, why this conflict is so dangerous right now, the possible scenarios that could unfold, and most importantly, how it might impact the global economy, from stock markets to oil prices. If you're passionate about geopolitics, international relations, and how events on the other side of the world affect the economy, this video is for you. Don't forget to subscribe to catch more in-depth analyses. On the brink of war, escalation of the India-Pakistan historical background in the Kashmir knot. The valleys of Kashmir have remained at the epicenter of tensions between two nuclear powers, India and Pakistan, for decades. After the partition of British India in 1947, a dispute arose over the ownership of the princely state of Kashmir. Since then, both India and Pakistan have claimed the region, effectively dividing it between them. The line of control demarcates the region, with each country administering a portion. However, this line is far from a permanent peace. It is one of the most militarized borders in the world. Since gaining independence, the two countries have fought three full-scale wars in 1947-48, 1965, and 1971, and countless skirmishes, including over the Siachen Glacier, the world's highest battleground. Each conflict has invariably centered around Kashmir, a picturesque mountain region whose ownership has been disputed for over 75 years. The historical disputes over Kashmir originated during the partition. The ruler of the princely state delayed his decision between joining India or Pakistan, leading to the First War of 1947. The wars of 1965 and 1971 deepened the division. The Simla Agreement of 1972 established the line of control as the de facto border. About 60% of the former princely state, Jammu and Kashmir, went to India. About 30%, Gilgit-Baltistan and so-called Azad Kashmir, to Pakistan, and the remaining 10%, Aksai Chin and Trans-Karakoram Tract, was occupied by China. Thus, the region remains divided among three countries, with Delhi and Islamabad as the principal claimants. Over the decades, Kashmir has become a powder keg of South Asia. Since the late 1980s, the region has been rocked by an armed separatist rebellion against Indian rule. India considers this insurgency as orchestrated and supported by Pakistan, which, according to New Delhi, wages a proxy war using Islamic militants. Indeed, many Kashmiri Muslims support the insurgents' goal of uniting Kashmir under Pakistan or achieving independence. India regularly accuses Pakistan of supporting terrorism, pointing to groups such as Jaish-e-Mohammed and Lashkar-e-Taiba, which operate from Pakistani territory. Islamabad denies direct involvement, claiming it only provides moral and diplomatic support for Kashmiris seeking self-determination. Despite occasional peace initiatives, border skirmishes and terrorist attacks in Kashmir have persisted for decades, fueling deep mutual distrust. Both countries have turned Kashmir into a heavily fortified zone. Bunkers, heavy artillery, and regular gunfire dominate the line of control. Any provocation could spark a broader conflict. It has happened before, but each time, diplomacy and the chilling realization of nuclear capabilities have pulled the countries back from the brink. Both India and Pakistan possess nuclear weapons, making direct confrontation suicidal. Pakistan and India possess enough nuclear warheads to obliterate each other several times over, notes Pakistani security analyst Syed Muhammad Ali. Any full-scale war is doomed to escalate into a nuclear exchange, a scenario of mutual assured destruction. This nuclear factor has served as the ultimate brake preventing a global catastrophe. Neither side can afford to initiate such a war or expect to gain anything from it, Ali adds. Paradoxically, nuclear weapons contribute to restraint. Understanding that all-out war means universal destruction forces Delhi and Islamabad to wage limited confrontations, mindful of the nuclear clock, and avoiding direct military clashes. Over years of confrontation, a unique conflict dynamic has developed. As Associated Press aptly observed, India and Pakistan do not fight like other countries. Instead of total war, they engage in limited military actions, indirect support of proxies, and tit-for-tat strikes. Any escalation proceeds cautiously, one step forward, half a step back, so as not to cross an invisible line. This pattern occurred in past crises and, as we see, is repeating again in 2025. Escalations in the past and attempts at peaceful resolution. The history of India-Pakistan. Relations is full of dangerous spikes in violence, which peacemakers have often managed to defuse at the last moment. After the large wars of the mid-20th century, there were also smaller local conflicts, such as the 1999 Kargil conflict, when Pakistani troops secretly infiltrated Indian positions across the line of control in the mountainous Kargil region. India was forced to launch a full-scale military operation. The world held its breath as both sides had already conducted nuclear tests the year before. Only urgent global diplomacy, led primarily by the United States, forced Pakistan to withdraw, ending the Kargil adventure. This episode showed how close the two sides could come to the brink, but also demonstrated the international community's determination to prevent a nuclear conflict in Asia. Another severe crisis occurred in December 2001, when militants attacked the Indian parliament in New Delhi. India accused Pakistani terrorists, specifically Jaish-e-Mohammed, of the assault and threatened war. In 2002, both countries deployed 1 million soldiers along the border for several months, again bringing the world to the verge of a nuclear standoff. Once more, common sense prevailed. With U.S. mediation and under Pakistani President Pervez Musharraf's pledges to rein in extremists, the situation was diffused. But trust remained low. India increasingly relied on force in response to provocations. The bloodiest years in Kashmir were the 1990s and 2000s. The armed uprising against Indian rule, fueled by militants and weapons, threatened to spiral out of control. Indian forces cracked down harshly, causing civilian suffering. Over the decades, tens of thousands have been killed in the Kashmir conflict. There were periods of relative calm. In 2003, India and Pakistan agreed to a ceasefire along the line of control, and for a few years, there was relative peace. Diplomatic attempts to solve the Kashmir problem followed. The 2001 Agra summit between Musharraf and Indian Prime Minister Vajpayee and the 2004 to 2008 composite dialogue negotiations raised hopes. In 1999, Vajpayee even made a historic visit to Lahore to declare friendship. Yet every time, goodwill gestures were derailed by fresh terrorist attacks or border incidents. The 2,420,008 peace process collapsed after the horrific November 2008 Mumbai terrorist attacks, which killed more than 170 people. India again blamed the Pakistan-based Lashkar-e-Taiba, and bilateral trust collapsed. A new regional crisis erupted in February 2019, called the Pulwama crisis. On February 14, 2019, a suicide bomber affiliated with Jaish-e-Mohammed rammed an explosive-laden vehicle into a bus carrying Indian police in Pulwama, Kashmir, killing over 40 people. The attack enraged India and led to direct accusations against Pakistan. For the first time in decades, India launched an airstrike inside Pakistani territory. On February 26th, Indian fighter jets bombed a militant camp in Balakot, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, Pakistan. The world again stood on edge. Pakistan responded with air raids on Indian Kashmir, shooting down an Indian MiG-21 fighter jet. The pilot ejected into Pakistani territory and was captured, but was returned a few days later in a gesture of goodwill. The tit-for-tat exchanges threatened to spiral into wider war, but tense diplomacy succeeded. On March 22, 2019, Prime Ministers Imran Khan and Narendra Modi agreed to cease hostilities and cooperate against terrorism. The 2019 example is telling. Both sides demonstrated resolve, then de-escalated, returning to the status quo. From India's perspective, such a limited response sufficed. It satisfied domestic demands for revenge without triggering full-scale war. This experience likely influenced India's actions in the new crisis unfolding in spring 2025. Escalation of the conflict in May 2025, from the Pahalgam attack to Operation Sindoor. In late April 2025, the situation in Kashmir deteriorated sharply again. In the scenic town of Pahalgam, Indian state of Jammu and Kashmir, a popular Hindu pilgrimage destination, tragedy struck. Armed militants opened fire on a group of tourists. The brutal attack killed 25 Indian pilgrims and their guide, shocking the nation. Authorities in New Delhi immediately claimed that the attackers had crossed from across the border and that extremist groups based in Pakistan again, Jaish-e-Mohammed and Lashkar-e-Taiba were behind the assault. For India, the attack became the last straw. The government of Prime Minister Narendra Modi faced intense domestic pressure for retaliation. Anti-Pakistan sentiment soared. Crowds took to the streets with portraits of the victims, demanding justice. Analysts noted that Modi, known for his decisive leadership style, could not afford to appear weak, especially ahead of key regional and national elections. Modi's Bharatiya Janata Party, BJP, which traditionally takes a hard stance toward Pakistan, had full public support for a forceful response. With diplomatic protests deemed insufficient, India opted for military action designed to minimize the risk of full-scale war. Drawing on its 2019 playbook, India planned precision strikes on terrorist targets inside Pakistan while trying to avoid direct clashes with Pakistani military forces. Thus, Operation Sindoor was born. Late on May 6, 2025, India's Ministry of Defense officially announced the start of Operation Sindoor. The name carries symbolic meaning. Sindoor is a red-orange powder traditionally worn by married Hindu women on the parting of their hair or forehead. In this context, it symbolized a red line crossed by the enemy with the blood of innocents. The Indian Army's press service simply declared on social media, "Justice delivered. Jai Hind. Long live India," indicating that retaliation had begun. Delhi emphasized that the strikes targeted only terrorist bases, not Pakistani military facilities. No Pakistani military installations were attacked. India exercised significant restraint in target selection and execution. The message was clear. India sought to punish militants without provoking a full-scale war. India's strikes, Operation Sindoor in action. In the early hours of May 7, 2025, Indian armed forces launched a series of sudden strikes on multiple targets inside Pakistan. According to New Delhi, 9 sites linked to terrorist infrastructure were hit. The strikes were conducted with precision weapons fired from Indian territory. Importantly, Indian warplanes did not enter Pakistani airspace. Instead, India used long-range ground-to-ground missiles and, as later confirmed, attack drones. This strategy allowed India to avoid crossing the border formally, reducing the risk of Pakistani anti-aircraft retaliation, while still reaching deep into Pakistani territory. Indian media reported that the main targets were militant training camps and arms depots operated by Jaish-e-Mohammed and Lashkar-e-Taiba. Indian intelligence had pinpointed the locations of several senior leaders of these organizations. The strikes were carried out in the middle of the night to catch the militants off guard. According to Indian sources, all missile launches originated from within India. Pakistan's foreign ministry confirmed this, accusing New Delhi of violating Pakistan's sovereignty by striking from afar. India maintained that the operation was militarily successful and just. Indian officials were reluctant to release details about specific targets, but information gradually emerged. For example, strikes hit areas in Pakistan-administered Kashmir, Azad Kashmir, destroying several alleged militant camps. Targets were also struck in Pakistan's Punjab province, notably in the city of Kotli in the East Ahmadpur area. Pakistan reported that 2 missiles hit civilian buildings in Kotli, killing 2 civilians. In East Ahmadpur, at least 12 people were injured. The most controversial reports came from strikes on religious sites. Pakistani authorities claimed that an Indian missile struck the Subhanallah Mosque in East Ahmadpur during nighttime prayers, killing 13 people. Another missile allegedly hit the Bilal Mosque in Muzaffarabad, capital of Pakistan-administered Kashmir, killing 3 people and injuring 2 children. India did not confirm these reports and suggested that if true, they were likely collateral damage. Nonetheless, civilian casualties gave Pakistan grounds to accuse India of aggression against civilians. Pakistan's military later estimated at least 31 deaths and dozens wounded from the Indian strikes early on May 7th. This included both alleged militants and civilians in Pakistan and Pakistani-administered Kashmir. Independent verification of the exact figures was unavailable, but even Indian media quietly acknowledged that non-combatants may have been among the victims. The scale of this strike was unprecedented in recent decades. Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif condemned the raid as an act of war and the most massive attack on Pakistani soil in many years. He posted on X, formerly Twitter, "Pakistan has every right to respond decisively to this Indian act of war, and a response has already been delivered." The statement made it clear that Islamabad would not let the assault go unanswered. Meanwhile, India also engaged in diplomacy immediately after the strikes. According to sources, Indian representatives quickly contacted major global capital, including Washington, London, Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, and reportedly Moscow, to explain the reasons and limited nature of the operation. India portrayed the action as a legitimate counterterrorism raid. While the strikes were highly targeted, they occurred on Pakistani sovereign territory, which for Islamabad equated to a declaration of war. Pakistan's response: missiles, drones, and cross-border shelling. Pakistan did not delay its response. By the afternoon of May 7th, just hours after the Indian strikes, tensions on the border began to escalate. A loud voice from Islamabad declared, "This is an act of war, and we will respond." At first, Pakistan opted for limited tactics, artillery bombardments to test India's reaction. Pakistani forces launched heavy mortar and artillery shelling at Indian positions along the line of control in Kashmir. The shelling targeted several populated areas on the Indian side, including Kupwara, Baramulla, Uri, Poonch, Mendar, and Rajouri in Jammu and Kashmir. Indian villages near the border came under heavy fire. According to the Indian government, 16 civilians, including 3 women and 5 children, were killed in the shelling, and dozens were injured. This became India's first civilian bloodshed after the Pahalgam attack. The deaths of Indian tourists were followed by the deaths of Indian villagers from Pakistani shelling. India said it was forced to return artillery fire to silence the Pakistani guns. Artillery duels erupted in the mountainous regions of Kashmir, a grimly familiar scene for locals fleeing to bunkers. But Pakistan did not stop with artillery. Late on May 7th, likely under the cover of darkness, Pakistani forces escalated to missile and drone attacks. According to New Delhi, during the night of May 78, Pakistan attempted large-scale strikes on Indian military targets using short-range ballistic missiles and armed drones. Air raid sirens blared in the city of Jammu, the winter capital of Jammu and Kashmir, and power was cut off to complicate targeting. Witnesses reported fiery missile trails and distant explosions. Similar incidents were reported elsewhere. The Indian Army later announced it had intercepted at least 8 Pakistani missiles aimed at military installations in Indian Kashmir, including areas near Jammu and Udhampur, major military garrisons. Pakistani drones also targeted areas further south, including the Indian state of Punjab and even Rajasthan's desert regions. In Punjab, Pathankot Air Force Station, just 20 miles from the border, was reportedly attacked. Meanwhile, artillery shelling continued along the border, spreading panic in Indian border villages. Eyewitnesses in Jaisalmer and Bikaner, western India, Thar Desert, also reported seeing missiles and hearing distant blasts. India's air defenses operated at full capacity, employing both anti-aircraft missile systems and new counter-drone technologies. According to Indian forces, all Pakistani missiles and drones were either intercepted or neutralized by electronic warfare measures. No losses, India reported, indicating no damage to military targets. Even if true, the sheer scale of Pakistan's deep strikes into Indian territory was the most dangerous development in recent years. However, conflicting information created confusion. Pakistani media claimed that their air defenses had shot down several Indian aircraft. Pakistani military spokesperson General Ahmad Sharif said 5 Indian fighters were destroyed, including 2 modern French Rafales. India categorically denied this. Reuters and other agencies cited reports of 3 Indian fighter crashes near the border, with pilots ejecting and surviving. The truth may lie somewhere in between. Technical malfunctions or bird strikes could have brought down the aircraft during chaotic nighttime operations. Neither side officially confirmed these incidents. One key feature of Pakistan's retaliation was the use of drones. Pakistani forces claimed that 25 Indian strike drones were launched into Pakistan overnight on May 8th. Pakistani air defenses reportedly shot down most of them. Debris from one crashed drone killed a civilian and injured another in Sindh province. Another drone allegedly damaged a military facility near Lahore, wounding 4 soldiers. Yet another crashed near Rawalpindi, close to Islamabad. Pakistan accused India of launching the drones. India claimed it was Pakistan that had used drones and missiles against India. As usual, the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. Both sides likely used drones. India employed them to strike remote targets such as air defense systems. Pakistan used them for retaliatory strikes on Indian military assets. On May 8th, Pakistani experts examined wreckage from an Indian drone strike in Karachi. Notably, for the first time, Indian drones reportedly reached as far as southern Pakistan's Sindh province. Witnesses in Karachi reported a flash and explosion. Debris, later identified as remnants of an Indian drone, was recovered. Thus, the battlefield spread across a vast front from the snowy mountains of Kashmir to the coastal areas of the Arabian Sea. Such a wide geographic spread had never been seen before in recent India-Pakistan conflicts and indicated a dangerously serious escalation. Morning of May 8, 2025, tense standoff and information war. By the morning of May 8, 2025, the situation remained extremely tense. Both capitals issued conflicting statements. In Islamabad, officials insisted they had not carried out covert strikes on India. "We deny it. We have done nothing yet. If we strike, the whole world will know," declared Pakistan's Defense Minister Khawaja Asif, hinting at a possible future retaliatory blow. Asif added that Pakistan was ready to de-escalate if India ceased its strikes. "But if attacked, we will respond." New Delhi, by contrast, justified its actions as necessary and warned Pakistan against further escalation. India's Foreign Minister Subramanyam Jaishankar stated firmly, "If we are attacked, there should be no doubt that the response will be very, very severe." Defense Minister Rajnath Singh emphasized that India always acts in response, indirectly blaming Pakistan's alleged support of terrorism as the reason for launching Operation Sindoor. Thus, both sides exchanged warnings. Pakistan denied any covert strikes, while India threatened further retaliation if attacks continued. Meanwhile, an information war raged as well. India blocked several popular accounts of Pakistani celebrities, athletes, and media outlets on its social media platforms. Instagram's Muslim page with millions of followers suddenly became inaccessible in India by government order. The move was seen by many as an attempt to prevent hostile propaganda, though some labeled it censorship. In Kashmir, Indian authorities also tightened information control, fearing potential protests from the local population. The region slipped into siege mode once again. Locals reported power outages, communication blackouts, and blocked roads. Indian security forces conducted raids and detained suspected separatists, apparently seeking to prevent any retaliatory terrorist attacks after India's strikes. By the morning and afternoon of May 8th, both sides had somewhat reduced military activity, seemingly pausing to assess the damage and plan their next steps. India declared it had achieved the objectives of the first phase of Operation Sindoor and stated it would continue if threats persisted. Pakistan, on the other hand, convened meetings with military leaders and diplomats while launching a campaign to attract global attention to what it called Indian aggression. Islamabad openly expressed frustration that India's framing of the strikes as anti-terrorist operations was gaining sympathy in the West, while civilian casualties in Pakistan received less media coverage. Pakistani diplomats urgently sent protests to the UN, major world powers, and Muslim countries, calling for condemnation of India. This battle over global perception was just as important as the military action on the ground, since whichever side the world viewed as responsible would face greater international pressure. International response: calls for restraint in geopolitical interests. A clash between two nuclear powers could not remain a regional matter. The entire world closely monitored the unfolding crisis. The international community responded within hours of the escalation, urging India and Pakistan to stop before the conflict spiraled out of control. The United States played an especially active role. The U.S. administration, traditionally keen to stabilize South Asia, immediately engaged with both capitals. Notably, by 2025, Donald Trump had returned as U.S. president. Though the crisis erupted only months into his new term, Trump did not remain silent. Speaking to journalists, he offered to mediate. "If I can help, I'm ready. I want them to settle with the conflict. I want them to stop its tit-for-tat now. I hope they can stop. We have good relations with both countries, and I want this to end." His emotional statement, "I want to see them stop," showed his personal concern for quick de-escalation. Trump had already offered mediation on Kashmir during his first term, though India had rejected outside involvement, insisting it was a bilateral issue. This time, the danger was so great that U.S. intervention became welcome again. The U.S. State Department, under Secretary of State Marco Rubio, appointed in Trump's new administration, held direct talks with Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and Indian Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar. Rubio stressed the need for immediate de-escalation and encouraged direct dialogue between Delhi and Islamabad. The State Department made it clear escalation was unacceptable, but Washington avoided explicitly blaming either side to preserve good relations with both nations. China, as Pakistan's closest ally and India's strategic rival, took a slightly different approach. Beijing traditionally supports Pakistan on the international stage and sides with Islamabad on Kashmir, especially as China controls part of the former princely state. On May 7th, China's foreign ministry expressed deep concern over the events and urged both sides to avoid further worsening the situation. The Chinese statement stressed that sovereignty and territorial integrity must be respected, and the fight against terrorism must be conducted within the framework of international law, a subtle condemnation of India's strikes without naming it directly. However, Beijing is not interested in a full-scale war on its southern borders, which would threaten regional stability and China's own projects and investments in Pakistan, such as the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPEC. Thus, China likely applied private pressure on Islamabad to avoid extreme escalation. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres reacted quickly. Through spokesperson Stéphane Dujarric, Guterres said he was deeply concerned about India's military operation and the overall escalation, and urged both sides to show maximum restraint. Guterres reminded both nations that all disputes must be resolved peacefully and offered the UN's good offices to help facilitate dialogue. The UN Security Council reportedly discussed the Kashmir crisis in a closed session, reportedly at China's request, but no resolution followed. Western powers, while sympathetic to India's framing of the strikes as counterterrorism, were not prepared to formally condemn Delhi. The UN Monitoring Group for India and Pakistan, UNMOGIP, continued observing increased firing across the line of control, confirming that artillery exchanges had reached their highest levels in 20 years. World and regional powers voiced cautious concern. The European Union called for de-escalation and respect for borders. The United Kingdom, as the former colonial power that once partitioned India and Pakistan, offered to use its diplomatic channels to diffuse tensions, noting the importance of protecting British citizens of Indian and Pakistani origin. Russia, which maintains friendly ties with both India and Pakistan, adopted a neutral stance. The Russian Foreign Ministry said Moscow was monitoring the situation and urged restraint, expressing readiness to mediate if necessary. Observers recalled that the Soviet Union had hosted the Tashkent Agreement in 1966, which ended the 1965 war. Though times have changed, Russia still seeks to project itself as a stabilizer in South Asia. The Islamic world also responded. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation, OIC, condemned the violence against Muslim pilgrims, referring to the Pahalgam attack, but also expressed concern about India's strikes inside Pakistan. Many Arab and Muslim nations avoided taking clear sides, given their economic and defense ties with both countries. However, public opinion in the Muslim world traditionally leans toward Pakistan as a brother nation. Solidarity demonstrations for Kashmir were held across Middle Eastern cities, and anti-India hashtags spread widely on social media in Muslim countries. Some governments, such as Turkey, openly criticized India and called its actions unacceptable. Turkey has positioned itself in recent years as a global defender of Muslim causes, and its strong support for Pakistan on Kashmir came as no surprise. Neighboring South Asian countries also expressed concern. Afghanistan worried about a potential refugee crisis if war broke out. Iran urged both sides to show wisdom. Bangladesh and Sri Lanka issued neutral statements, fearing regional instability. International organizations and forums such as the G20 and SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which includes both India and Pakistan, began emergency consultations. China and Russia reportedly pushed for an extraordinary SCO foreign ministers meeting to try to bring Jaishankar and his Pakistani counterpart to the negotiating table. The World Bank and IMF expressed concern that the conflict could destabilize regional economies. Pakistan, already struggling economically, could lose vital international support if the crisis continued. Possible scenarios: war or peace. As of May 89, 2025, the situation remained extremely fragile and could develop in various ways. Here are several possible scenarios, from worst to best, as well as an assessment of the crisis's impact on domestic politics in both countries. Scenario 1. Further escalation toward full-scale war. Despite strong restraining factors, it is not impossible that violence could spiral out of control. A new major terrorist attack or mass casualties on either side could push hawkish leaders toward further action. For example, if Pakistan were to retaliate with a powerful strike on Indian territory, say, by hitting a large military base or a city, India would likely feel compelled to respond even more forcefully. This could trigger a declaration of war and open ground combat. India, with superior conventional military strength, a $74.4 billion defense budget in 2025 versus Pakistan's $10 billion and more than double the troop numbers, could attempt to deliver a knockout blow to Pakistani forces. Some in India might argue it is time to eliminate terrorist bases once and for all, even at the cost of a wider war. However, any invasion would immediately raise the nuclear threshold. Pakistan's military doctrine allows for the use of nuclear weapons if its survival is threatened by an overwhelming Indian attack. If even a single nuclear weapon were used, deterrence would collapse. Retaliatory strikes would follow, escalating into mutual nuclear devastation. This would be catastrophic for both countries and the world: millions dead, global radiation fallout, and a potential nuclear winter affecting the planet's climate. Such an outcome is considered unthinkable by nearly all observers. Pakistani expert Zahid Ahmed notes that neither Islamabad nor Delhi has any incentive to start a total war. Fully understanding the stakes, only a chain of errors or unintended escalation could lead to such a disaster. A nightmare scenario would involve China. If China sensed that India had weakened itself in a westward war, it might be tempted to act along their disputed Himalayan border, which has been tense since 2020. India has long feared a two-front war against both Pakistan and China. So far, China has not intervened, but has increased military readiness in Tibet. A regional war involving 3 nuclear powers would be an unimaginable global nightmare. Scenario 2. Limited escalation and continuation of a game of nerves. The more likely outcome is that both sides continue limited strikes over the coming days without crossing the point of no return. Pakistan might carry out more symbolic actions, such as launching test missiles into uninhabited areas or conducting a new missile test, while India responds with localized artillery or targeted airstrikes against newly detected militant sites. This would maintain the current status quo, tit-for-tat retaliation, but with both sides avoiding strikes on capitals or critical strategic assets. The conflict would smolder dangerously, with skirmishes possibly continuing for days or weeks and causing casualties on both sides. International pressure would play a decisive role in preventing further escalation. In 2019, the Pulwama crisis lasted about 2 weeks before diplomatic efforts defused the situation. The same pattern could repeat now, with the world community pushing both sides toward a ceasefire before irreversible damage occurs. Scenario 3. Rapid de-escalation and return to diplomacy. The most optimistic scenario is that both sides consider their objectives, met India punishing the terrorists, Pakistan demonstrating its readiness to respond and return to the negotiating table. Quiet third-party mediation could help, perhaps led by countries with ties to both sides, such as the United Arab Emirates or Saudi Arabia, which reportedly intervened in 2019. If successful, both countries might agree to withdraw military forces from border areas and re-establish communication channels. One key element could be a Pakistani pledge to crack down on terrorist groups, which was India's core demand behind launching Operation Cinder. Pakistan has historically denied involvement while condemning specific attacks. This time, it might come under global pressure to take tangible action. In return, India might halt further military operations and resume ceasefire commitments along the line of control. Symbolic gestures could follow, Pakistan handing over debris from downed Indian drones or India returning fragments of intercepted Pakistani missiles. These gestures often help both sides save face domestically. Most experts believe the current crisis could resolve similarly to 2019. After a brief period of escalation, both sides would de-escalate. Indian scholar Srikanth Kondapalli notes that India deliberately avoided targeting Pakistani military bases to avoid provoking total war, leaving Pakistan room not to feel existentially threatened. Domestic political factors. In India, Prime Minister Modi's BJP, known for its hard line on Pakistan and terrorism, has enjoyed a political boost after decisive action. Even opposition parties were forced to support the government on national security. This gives Modi leeway to declare mission accomplished if de-escalation follows. However, India's long-term goal of becoming a global economic powerhouse requires stability, not war. In Pakistan, the situation is more complex. The civilian government of Shehbaz Sharif faces political turmoil and economic challenges. The military plays an enormous role and may have used the crisis to justify its budget and influence. Pakistan's military likely prefers to demonstrate successful defense while avoiding full-scale conflict that the country cannot afford economically. Pakistan's public, inflamed by rhetoric, expects a firm stance, and the army may present the shooting down of Indian planes, even if unconfirmed, as proof of victory to satisfy domestic expectations before agreeing to de-escalation. Both governments may prefer to step back after demonstrating resolve, avoiding wider war. However, an unintended escalation remains possible if a stray missile or incident causes mass casualties, triggering demands for retaliation. To prevent miscalculations, communication channels are essential. Military attachés and special diplomatic groups are likely working now to clarify incidents and avoid misunderstanding. Economic consequences, local and global impact. Beyond the humanitarian and political dimensions, the current crisis is having serious economic consequences for both India and Pakistan, and to some extent, for the global economy. Although combat has been limited so far, the first negative effects are already visible, and much larger shocks could follow if tensions persist. Local economic impact. In the border regions of both countries, local economies have virtually ground to a halt. In India and Kashmir and Punjab, states of emergency were declared, residents fled to shelters, and markets were shuttered. Kashmir's tourism industry, already weakened by years of conflict, was dealt a severe blow. Following the Pahalgam attack, all bookings were canceled and pilgrims were evacuated. The spring tourist season was ruined, depriving thousands of locals guides, boatmen on Dal Lake, hotel owners of their livelihoods. Farming in border villages has also been disrupted. Farmers are afraid to work in the fields due to shelling, threatening this year's planting season. In Pakistan, areas along the border in Kashmir and Punjab are facing similar disruption. Pakistan also closed its airspace for 48 hours as a precaution, grounding hundreds of domestic and international flights. Major airports in Islamabad, Lahore, and Karachi were temporarily paralyzed. Some Europe-Southeast Asia routes that normally cross Pakistani airspace had to divert via Iran or Central Asia, increasing travel time and fuel costs. Markets and investor sentiment. The initial response of financial markets in both countries was nervous. Pakistan's KSE 100 stock index fell sharply as war fears mounted, and the already weak Pakistani rupee came under further pressure. India's Nifty 50 index initially dropped by several percentage points, but then recovered somewhat, as investors seemed to bet that war would be avoided. Nevertheless, foreign funds began taking a more cautious stance, and some paused their dealings in Indian and Pakistani assets. A prolonged crisis could lead to capital outflows, especially for Pakistan, which is heavily dependent on IMF aid and faces the risk of losing further international financial support if instability continues. Trade and logistics. Direct trade between India and Pakistan has already been minimal since India imposed restrictions in 2019, but some unofficial trade through third countries and smuggling at the border persisted. That has now stopped completely. More significantly, regional transport corridors have been jeopardized. Pakistan serves as a land route for trade between India and Afghanistan and further into Central Asia. These routes are now closed. China's Belt and Road Initiative project, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPEC, which passes through Pakistan-administered Kashmir and links western China to the Pakistani port of Gwadar, could also be at risk if the fighting intensifies. China has expressed concerns for the safety of its workers in Pakistan. India has long opposed CPEC and theoretically could try to disrupt it militarily, for example by targeting the Karakoram Highway. So far, India has not done so, but the instability has increased shipping insurance costs for goods transiting through Pakistan. Energy markets. Although India and Pakistan are not major oil producers, any military tensions near key maritime routes, such as the Arabian Sea and Indian Ocean, unsettle global energy traders. If ports such as Karachi or Gwadar were affected, oil tanker flows could be disrupted. So far, oil prices have risen only moderately by 23%, while gold viewed as a safe haven has also gone up. India, as the world's third largest oil consumer, would face serious supply issues in the event of wider war. Pakistan, already in an energy crisis, would face even worse shortages, refinery closures, blackouts, and fuel supply disruptions. Industrial and IT sector impact. India's fast-growing IT sector and manufacturing ambitions could also be hurt by continued geopolitical instability. While tech hubs like Bangalore and Hyderabad are far from the conflict zone, investors might still hesitate if India appears risky. Some global firms have begun contingency planning in case of further deterioration, including the possible relocation of operations. In Pakistan, textile manufacturing, a critical part of the export economy, is vulnerable. Many textile mills are located in Punjab cities like Faisalabad and Lahore, as well as Sindh, Karachi, Hyderabad. If tensions persist, international buyers may start diverting orders elsewhere. There have already been reports of European fashion brands delaying new contracts with Pakistani suppliers. A similar blow to India's textile sector could follow if raw cotton prices rise. Pakistan is a major cotton producer, and any disruption in its exports could affect Indian mills. China-India trade routes. Direct overland trade between China and India remains almost non-existent due to disputed borders, but CPEC remains a sensitive issue. If the conflict continues, hopes for future India-China overland cooperation would be further dashed. India might align even more closely with anti-China regional alliances, such as the Quad, while China could double down on supporting Pakistan. Summary: even if the conflict de-escalates quickly, the damage has already been done. Investor confidence has been shaken, border trade has collapsed, and several industries have taken significant losses. The longer tensions persist, the worse the economic fallout will be. On a local level, this means destroyed homes, lost incomes for thousands of families, and shortages of essential goods. Globally, it adds to market volatility, supply chain disruptions, and a general rise in geopolitical risk. Conclusion: the fragility of peace and the need for dialogue. A dramatic scenario is unfolding before us. Two long-standing rivals, India and Pakistan, have once again approached the brink of disaster. The Kashmir conflict, smoldering for decades, has erupted into open flames, threatening to consume everything in its path. While reason and the doctrine of mutual nuclear deterrence have, so far, prevented the fire from spreading out of control, tensions have reached levels unseen in years. The world holds its breath. Millions of people on both sides of the border live in fear, from farmers in the mountain villages of Kashmir hiding from shelling to business people in the metropolises anxiously following the news. Both nations mourn their dead and justify their actions with a sense of righteous anger. But within this triangle of Pain Delhi, Islamabad, Kashmir, there are no victors in war, only new graves. Experts and world leaders are calling for dialogue, and there is hope that the first signs of de-escalation may appear in the coming days. It is vital that reason prevails over emotion, that the guns fall silent and the voices of diplomacy are heard. India and Pakistan have far too much at stake: the lives of their citizens, the future of their economies, the peace and stability of the entire region. Both nations have already experienced the horrors of war in the last century and know the price of bloodshed. The time has come to remember that lesson and step back. Even if this current crisis is diffused, profound questions remain. How can future terrorist attacks and outbreaks of violence be prevented? How can the vicious cycle of hostility be broken? As long as Kashmir remains a disputed territory, lasting peace in the region will remain elusive. Bold political steps, compromises, and possibly international assistance will be needed to find a settlement acceptable to all parties. Otherwise, history may well repeat itself yet again. Right now, in May 2025, the world watches the burning hills of Kashmir with both hope and dread: hope that the worst can be averted, and dread that each new gunshot could become the fatal spark. Ordinary people in India and Pakistan pray for peace, remembering relatives on the other side of the border, separated by decades of history. We must hope their prayers are answered. After all, no political dispute is worth the incineration of two peoples who share common roots and cultures. Let reason triumph over the roar of weapons, and let South Asia step back from the edge for the sake of its own future and the future of the entire world. The outcome of this crisis will be decided in the coming hours and days. The world watches, aware of the gravity of the moment. History has already brought India and Pakistan to the brink many times, only for both sides to pull back at the last possible moment. Will this be the case again? Most likely, since neither side truly desires the deaths of millions. One thing, however, is certain: the echoes of this tense week will reverberate for a long time, reminding all how fragile peace is and how precious it becomes when life and death are at stake. Let this be a lesson. Dialogue is better than gunfire, and cooperation is more valuable than confrontation. We can only hope that soon the mountains of Kashmir will once again fall silent, and the dawn of a new day will bring long-awaited peace.